I am now honored to welcome Fatimah Al Dulaimee, who is presenting Atameen, the Art of Preservation.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all the information and the introduction. Hello, everyone. So again, my name is Fatima. Today we'll spend some time talking about Etameen. Etameen is just the Arabic in the Iraqi region of the Middle East for Middle Eastern embroidery and cross-stitching. And we'll discuss more about the origins, how it's practiced, and how Etameen has also become a way of documenting history and preserving history of people from the Middle East. And so let's see. And so just a very quick introduction. Again, my name is Fatima. I graduated from the University of Rochester this past May with a BA in Studio Arts and a BS in Molecular Genetics. Right now, I wasn't born in Rochester, but I grew up in Rochester. So did all of my schooling there. But I was born in a city called Babylon in Iraq. And right now, I am based in Philadelphia working in clinical research. The goal ultimately is medicine, but I like to incorporate art as much as possible into everything I do, especially with medicine. It goes hand in hand. And so I love to travel, and it was really through traveling that I got to learn more about the practice of embroidery across the globe and how something like embroidery, a needle and a thread and fabric, has really been used across different regions and different groups of people, but really it's been used and adapted to the needs of that specific group of people. So you might have seen embroidery across Europe, across Asia, across the Middle East, across Latin America, but oftentimes how it's used is different. And it's very interesting to think about how each group of people have taken that art form and really used it in order to convey their stories and convey where they're from. And so, what is Atameen in relation to the Middle East? And so, Atameen is an art form that was created by Arab women, majority for other Arab women, in order to decorate clothing and household items in designs that depict the history and the lineage of that family. So, when you're thinking about Middle Eastern embroidery, what I really want you to imagine is women sitting together in a circle. They have a dress in front of them and they're all sitting there working on that dress together. Oftentimes these pieces of clothing that they're decorating and they're creating these motifs on are used by that specific woman for religious ceremonies, to wear for holidays, for weddings, special occasions, sometimes just to wear around the house just to feel pretty and look pretty. And so it's something that women come together, they create this space where they're both practicing this art form, but it also becomes a place of documenting that history. Oftentimes, the motifs and the cross stitching and the embroidery that's been placed on that dress depicts where that woman is from, what surrounds her land, what kind of animals are around that land, what does she work for, what does she do for work, what does her parents do for work, what about her husband, what does he do. And so they're really becoming a piece of history. Those pieces of clothing and those dresses become a piece of history that describe where that woman is from. And so, again, the origin of where Middle East or the origin of where embroidery in general came from is a little bit unclear. A lot of historians say that it predates to countries in Asia, especially in China. Some say no, actually, it's kind of started back in Europe. So there is a lot of debate back and forth about where it originated. But the idea that each culture and each country has adapted it and created unique patterns to tell their story is the most important part. Even across the Middle East as well, Atameen can be used very differently. So there are specific motifs that we'll talk about that can be used in one region of the same country even, but are then deciphered differently in another region, and a different motif has been used to create that same object, that same item, that same animal or plant that they want to describe. And so when it comes to Iraq, in the northern part, there is something called a charuga. And so what a charuga really is a panel, a textile panel that oftentimes even the panel itself has been weaved by women from the area. And they take embroidery and they create these motifs that are very descriptive. And so as you can see, there are people here, there are animals, there is a sun, there are objects, wheels. Oftentimes, this is very practiced among the Christian community in the northern part of Iraq. And so, as a result, they've also taken religiously significant portraits and descriptions. And, like, for example, you have the Last Supper, something that holds religious significance that they've also then translated over into embroidery. You also have writing as well that's been embroidered here. You also have the cross. So taking these objects and then very descriptively embroidering them onto that piece of clothing. And so then it's worn, there's usually like a tie, and then you tie it from here to the back, and then it holds on the front. And so again, they're oftentimes used for religious ceremonies and around the holiday season. And there's only one woman that is still practicing this in the northern region of Iraq. And so unfortunately, there has been a lot of things that got in the way that prevented the practice from continuing. When you think of embroidery as well, so, going back to the whole lineage of how it's women coming together. And so as a result, it's very woman oriented. And so the younger generation really learn about embroidery from the older generation that passed it down. But when war and economic impacts really affect the community, they affect the art that the community practices. And so women are no longer concerned about practicing this art form. Now they're worried about staying alive, about providing for their family, making sure that they have enough water, enough food, that they have a shelter. And so really war has taken a big impact on this and shifted the dynamic away from women practicing this art craft. When it comes to the Levantine region, the practice is, instead of embroidery, you actually have cross-stitching, and it becomes a little bit more abstract. And so in countries like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Palestine, you're still trying to convey the same elements. So you're still conveying plants, you're still conveying animals, you're still conveying land, objects, you're even conveying like the occupations of different people and what they do for a living. But it's taking it from something that's more instead of making it very descriptive, is making it more abstract. So for example, right here, you have the moon of Bethlehem. If you look back in Iraq, you can see the sun right here. Can you see my cursor, by the way? You can? Okay. So you have the sun that's right here, but again, it's taking that specific item, that specific thing that you want to portray and making it a little bit more abstract. And the reason why that differs as well is because oftentimes it's the woman from that region who described that specific object and translated it over to embroidery. So you can have things, for example, like the cypress tree, that are very common across the Levantine region and across the Middle East. But each of them has been converted in a way that made sense to that group of women in that region. They're oftentimes also converted to be more of a standalone motif versus a border. And so, for example, this one right here is oftentimes used as a border design to outline a region of that clothing. So as you can see, the line right here, even along here, these are all different motifs that have been put together to create a border instead of a standalone design. Now, the thing to keep in mind as well is that oftentimes, again, this is something that's also been heavily impacted by modernization. So the use of tools, a lot of embroidery can be replicated now by machines. And so it makes it a lot faster. It makes it more accessible. And so oftentimes these women that used to come together, they would create these pieces together, work on them together for their family, but it would take a lot of time, even if you had the help of 5 to 6 women coming together. And so the result of machines being used to replicate embroidery has also taken away from that art craft. But there are a lot of movements, both within the United States, but also back home as well in the Middle East, that are trying to revive that, to also give women more independence, to have their own income, to continue the practice, and to continue the lineage of passing it down from one generation to the next so it can continue. And so when it comes to the Levantine region, what I really want you to imagine is X's. That's how you are cross-stitching. So you have this fabric that we'll talk about in a second, but you're really going from one hole to the next, and you're creating these X's that then come together to create these motifs. And so it looks pixelated when you're first looking at the pattern, and that's because quite literally it is boxes and X's that are next to each other in order to create them. And so the items that you use, and before I get into the items, because we're going to step into a little bit of the tutorial and how you can get started, do you guys have any questions for me at all about practice, modern practice, older practice, any questions at all regarding embroidery and cross-stitching?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, do you mean that the individual embroiderer could design their own to create their own design for this tree, for instance? The same tree could have multiple different design just because the individuals have different ideas how to capture the shapes or the essence or the spirit of that tree. Does
Yeah,
that?
and that's how it started. So that's exactly how it started. It was a woman that decided that essentially trying to replicate that tree to her looked like this. This is how she made it. But then as a result of that, it became origin or region specific. So let's say that you are in Beirut, Lebanon. In that region, women decided that to them, this is what a cypress tree looks like. So now a lot of the women in that region, that's how they cross stitch that. And so when you oftentimes there are a lot of books that you can actually buy for different embroidery. The most preserved has been the Palestinian embroidery, and that's known as tatris in the Palestinian dialect and the Levantine dialect. And so it's been preserved where they have it broken up by region, that if you want to and a bird, a specific bird, let's say a sparrow, that this is how it's done in this region of Palestine. In Lebanon, this is how it's done. So it's really that one woman that took that interpretation and it stuck around and it became region specific.
All right. Fascinating. Thank you.
Yes, of course, of course. All right. Any other questions? All right. So we'll move on to the materials. You're more than welcome to raise your hand or put a comment in the chat, and then I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. But the materials for embroidery are first the cotton thread, and oftentimes there are different sizes for that as well. And so the sizes are related to how many threads you have that are put together. And so the basic one is the one that you have on the screen that I like to use. It's very accessible as well. Michael's, you can find it at most arts and crafts stores. And so that is the first item, and that's used to essentially do the embroidery. That's what you're doing the embroidery with. The second item is the Ida cloth. And so the Ida cloth, and I can show you here as well. Okay. Let me flip this. Okay, so the Ida cloth is quite literally, just like you see on the screen, is holes. So it's fabric that has been weaved together. It's also cotton still, but it's fabric that has been weaved together to create these grids and these holes. And so oftentimes what could happen as well, let me give you a better example, is, for example, like right here, these ends come apart. And I'm trying to see if I could show you. Give me 1 second. Okay. And so oftentimes there is these little ends that could come together. I'm trying to see if I could pull it apart for you guys. Oftentimes you need like tweezers. But you see how that came apart right there? And so once you start doing the embroidery and start doing the cross stitching, this starts to come apart. And that's how you have just the embroidery that's left over and you don't have any more of this fabric. And so this is really used as a way to start the process of cross stitching so that you have a stencil to go about it. All right. And so let me turn on my camera here. And again, there are also different sizes for the Ida cloth. And so the size is really oftentimes used as a count. So if you look it up, you might have a 7-count cloth versus a 20-count cloth. And the count is for the fact that it's the number of squares per inch. And so if you have a 7-count cloth, what that really means is that you have a lot bigger boxes in that 1 inch. And so oftentimes you can create really big ones. A lot of people can actually make rugs out of this as well because you have those bigger holes. And so you can create these bigger X's and to create a rug with it. But the smaller count or the bigger count, so the 20 inches or the 20 squares per inch can give you closer holes that oftentimes can look like it's a dot, but it's actually still an X that's on there. And then the last thing is the needle. And so there is 2 different needles. There's a cross stitch needle and there's an embroidery needle. Now, keep in mind that if you are using the Ida cloth, it already comes with the holes. So the cross stitching needle is just perfect because you actually don't need to puncture anything. Now, if you have the Ida cloth and then you have fabric underneath, because that's how oftentimes the designs are used. You have the cloth on top, the fabric underneath, so that as you're cross-stitching, the cross-stitch remains on the fabric. You oftentimes end up having to use that embroidery needle so that it's blunt enough or it's sharp enough to go through the fabric as well and have the thread go through. And so 25, the size is the safest bet for today's workshop. If you have smaller or bigger, that's okay. Oftentimes the 24 is also nice because the hole at the top, the eye, is big enough for the thread to go through as well. Okay, and so how you start is that you want to pick a pattern. You pick the color thread, you loop the thread through, you make a knot at the end of the thread, and then you prick the needle through the back of the cloth and you start. And so I will demonstrate this in a second. I'm going to send you guys a document, and let me see. Copy link. In the chat, you have access to, oh, that is not it. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. I think this should work now. Okay, so in the chat, you have access to a link that now has, it's a Google Doc link, and it has access to a document that has 3 different patterns. And so on my screen, you have the Damascus rose. And so that is actually a Palestinian pattern, despite the fact that this is a rose that's part of Syria and part of Damascus. And so this is a Palestinian interpretation of that rose, and it's very common across Palestine. And then I also put in a sparrow bird, and that's also in Palestine, but in the region of Ramallah. And then the last one is, instead of a standalone motif, it's actually a border. And so you have a baker's wife that's also across Palestine. So this is depicting the occupation of the husband, and it's used on the piece of clothing that's used for that woman. And so the way that you read these patterns is each box represents an X. So for example, this one right here, this is one X, and this is the X right next to it. And so I'll start the process. I'll turn my camera back on, and then I'll start the process of actually showing you how to do how to follow a pattern. And so give me 1 second. Okay. All right. And so I picked my pattern. First step, I'm going to do the bird. My second step is I'm going to pick out a color yarn. And so I'm using this brown color, and I'm going to use it to first start off with the peak. The color is completely up to you. You can switch around the color for the pattern. You can keep the same colors, completely up to you. But now I have this yarn. I already looped it through the hole. And so this right here is the hole of that needle, and I've looped it through, but I did not loop it through all the way. I kind of looped it halfway through. All right, so I have it looped through, and then just halfway. And then after that, you want to make a knot at the end. And the reason why you're making that knot is so that as you're putting your embroidery through, the thread doesn't completely go through, and you actually have it stuck to the back, so that you can continue to build onto your embroidery. So however you like to make your knots, I kind of twist them around my finger and then pull. That's how my mom taught me how to make a knot. All right, and then it helps to double knot as well. So you triple make sure that it doesn't go through. And now you have your needle that's attached to the thread with the knot at the end of it.
I'm just going to offer that on your screen next to the line of people, if you drag your cursor there and pull it over, you can make Fatima's little box a little bit bigger so that you can see her hands.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And so now you have your grid, and we'll get started with the grid, right? So we have our needle, we have the thread, we made the knot, and then we're going to get started. Now, what I'm going to do is actually start with the beak first, okay? And so I'm going to pick a random square, doesn't matter. Let's say I want to do this one. You want to start from the back first, and then poke the hole through, or poke the needle through one of the holes. All right. And now it makes sense why we made the knot. The knot is going to stay in the back, and then the thread doesn't go through the grid. Okay. Now to make the X, again, remember that you're going diagonally. So we made it through this hole right now. To go diagonally, I'm going to go to the one right next to it. And then pull through. All right. And then I'm going to come back up. You see now that you have made this diagonal line, you're still making X's. So you're going to come to the hole that's right above the line that you had just created. You're going to pull through from the back and then come back down across it. And now you've made an X. All right, so what we just created is a 1x1 X. You can space them more out. You can have this and then go skip one box and go to the next, and that just creates bigger boxes. But everything here that's on this grid is a 1x1 box, okay? Any questions so far? The thing to keep in mind is always follow the orientation of where that thread is. So my thread right now is at the back, right? And so always remember that you're going to start from the back and not come back from the front. What could happen if you come back from the front is now you've actually looped your thread around the grid. And so always follow the orientation and then go from the back. So now I've created this first box right here for the first of the peak. And then I'm going to follow the next one right over. And so you actually end up going back in the same hole. So I'm going to pick the hole that's right next to it. I'm going to find where the hole is from the back. All right. And then you end up going back in that same hole right there so that the two X's are right next to each other. All right. That's one diagonal line. My needle is in the back, so I go from the back. I poke it in the hole that's right next to it. Now my thread is at the front. I poke through the front. And now I've created two X's right next to each other and we finish the beak. Okay. Now what you can do is, now that we finish this, we can make a knot in the back so that we can switch colors. So far, now I want to get started on the actual body and creating the body. And so then I'm just going to make a knot on the back. All right. I'm a big fan of double knotting, triple knotting, quadruple knotting, as many knots to make sure that your work isn't going to come undone. And then use a pair of scissors. And there you go. Now you have two X's on the front. All right. So now I'm going to switch over and I'm actually going to make a black sparrow. So my next thread is going to be black. And I want to show you guys how to skip as well. It's not too hard. It's not hard at all, but it's just something to wrap your head around if this is your first time cross stitching. And so again, oh no, you guys, my phone fell. Okay. And so now I have black. Uh-oh. Okay, there. And so now I have black. Again, I'm going to make a knot at the end. And then I want to start with the top of the head. So right here. And so that first box is diagonal from the one that we're at. So instead of going right above, right below, right next, we're actually going to do right diagonal across from it. We always start from the back. Then I come back to the one right next to it, diagonal from the first hole that we made. And then you come back from the bottom. And then you loop it back through. Okay. And so the first one right here, this we're gonna skip this box right here because on the pattern it says that that's the white one. And so we're not gonna go to the one right across from the top. We actually come back down and skip that. Right, like this. And when you're first starting off, sometimes you might have to look in the back to trace back your thread and see where the hole was, because it can be hard to kind of like feel it out and see where that hole is. And then there you go. So now we've skipped it. So now I've created this little pattern right here. We have this, which is the eye. I'm interpreting that to be the eye of the bird. That is the white space. Okay. And then you just continue to create these patterns. The sparrow one is really good if you want to get a feel of skipping boxes around and creating a pattern. And you can see it come alive as well at the end so that you can see where you might have made some mistakes. The border is really good for getting a repetitive practice for embroidery. You're doing the same pattern over and over and over again. So it's really helpful. You're doing the same thing. You're still skipping boxes as well. So it could be really helpful for that. And then if you have some background in cross stitching and embroidery, the rose is a really lovely one to learn how to do and make. All right. Do you guys have any questions for me about practice at all? If you have, do you have any problems? Are you running into any issues? Do you want me to explain anything again? No? Okay. So we are at the end. I do want to just go over any last minute things we're practicing together, and that is my email. And so you are more than welcome to reach out to me. Let me turn this camera off. Okay. You're more than welcome to reach out to me via email. I have it on my phone, so I'm very responsive on the email. If you have any questions, any concerns, if you started your embroidery and then you're running into problems, you're more than welcome to send me a picture and I'll help you troubleshoot through any of the problems as well. And if you ever want to just connect and talk more, I've done my own practice with embroidery. So I've taken it and had my own twist on it. So this was my senior show for my bachelor's in art degree. And so I'm more than happy to also talk about that if you want to hear more. But that's all that I had for today. There is the follow-up that is at 3 today if you want to just come and show me what you've made. But if you also want to run through and troubleshoot any problems, you're more than welcome to hop on that call as well. All right.
Awesome. You actually do have 3 minutes. So if there
Oh,
are
I did. Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really fun. It took me probably half the time that you were halfway through your bird and I finally got my needle thread.
No, that's okay. That's why I did it beforehand. I'm the same way as well. Especially if you get the thread where it's been like weaved around itself. So that was the black one that I used. The brown one is actually thread that they have it weaved through together. And so that one's usually a lot easier to pull through the needle, but I run into that problem. My mom, guys, because my mom has taught me this, she always licks it and then uses her finger to flatten it out. And I do that all the time.
Yeah.
So that's a little trick. But
This
yeah.
has been really, really interesting. Like, first of all, to hear about it, to see some beautiful examples and
Yeah.
try it. So I'm looking forward to seeing if people bring things back.
I'm very much looking forward to that as well.
I finished my little project during the
Can I see?
Stella's back. Yeah, of course. Stella's back. So I did my own thing, of course. I didn't have that
Yep.
the embroidery stuff. So I
Okay.
grabbed a jacket that was ripped. So my button was ripped. And so
Oh.
I tried to do the baker's
Love it.
and
Love it.
like this was broken, so I also just like did a little design around that, you know what I mean? So anyway,
I love that so much.
it's
Oh, so you
Whoa.
completely like
This
free-handed it because you didn't have the cloth.
yeah, that's why it
Okay.
looks like a mess. But I still think it's sweet.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I can see the jacket I'm wearing right now. I don't know if you can see, but it's supposed to be like a little palm tree.
Oh yeah.
There was also like a rip in there as well too. And I didn't like the previous embroidery. It was like casino something. I was like, okay, I'm gonna cover that up.
I was
I
thinking
love
about
it. I love it.
I was gonna try and do the flower around the snap, but it was too complicated. I didn't have enough space, so
That's okay. That's okay. I think the second that the design becomes a little bit more complicated, it's helpful to have the grid as like guidance for it.
Hmm.
yeah.
Absolutely. But it looks great. It looks great.
Yeah, yay.
Amazing.
Stella, did you work on something?
I didn't have the right tools and right materials, but I will.
Okay, okay.
But
Do
I
you have
do,
access to the PDF or not the PDF, the Google
uh,
Docs? We can like
yes.
always go back or find more patterns as well.
Oh, okay. Okay. I do have a question.
Yeah,
I'm just so intrigued by the design and how the clothing itself is so closely related to the land of the
yeah,
people
yeah.
because on and their the robes, is this a robe?
It's
Yeah,
a dress. Yeah,
a
yeah.
dress. On the dress you can see plants,
Yep,
animals, or
yep.
even the sun.
Yeah,
So it it also reminds me of the Haudenosaunee, or specifically the Onondaga people in our area,
yeah,
and how they're, um, for instance, how they would decorate their hat with beadwork and
yeah,
flowers and all these different patterns. I have a question. I
yeah.
think on one hand, I can see how women culturally across the globe, women seems to have been associated with the land across the cultures. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and and one way to look at this is look at the designs of their traditional attire. But I wonder if men are also in some way taught and brought up to have this very clear consciousness
Mm,
of their relationship to the land. I think it's not enough just for women to be connected to the land. The whole community, if the whole
yep.
community, regardless their, yeah, the gender, everyone should feel connected to the land that supports them, that supports their community. How about men? Are there designs on their clothing that also suggest their connections with the land?
So when it comes to the men,
Mm.
oftentimes the piece of clothing that a lot of the men tend to wear is the kufiya. And the kufiya is, I wish I had a picture to show you right now, but it was often worn by a lot of the farmers. It actually started in ancient Iraq where it was worn to associate with rank. But the kufiya itself has different patterns, and the one that stands out the most when it's related to the land is olive branches.
Mm.
That again is a connection of the land back to the man. The conceptually it was very much a societal norm for the men to be doing labor with the land. So that's why when it comes to things like farming, olives, raising cattle, that were socially very normative men roles, and the
Mhm.
women are more so associated to that man by the role. So for example, one of the patterns is the baker's wife, and so that's just
Mhm.
the fact that that is a man whose occupation was working with the land, with flour,
Yeah.
with wheat, and things of that nature. But her association became as an affiliate of his, and he
Mm.
affiliate of that land. And so
Mhm.
for the men specifically, when it comes to the garment, the first one that always stands out the most is that kufia, because it is taking an element still from that land of the olives, that for a lot of regions, olives is a way of connecting to the land. It's also an economical benefit, because something that where a lot of the regions were able to gain independence. They were able to gain financial independence through having the fact that they can grow olives, they can turn it into olive oil and things of that nature. But it seems to be a lot more practiced within the women. So oftentimes that's why it's like a by woman for women kind of art craft because of that, because it was initially started by the woman.
I think you received some questions.
I do. So I can send you my email right in the chat. And you're more than welcome to reach out to me. And I do believe that you will have access to, if I'm right, I think it'll be on YouTube as well and on the website. I think Missy will have more information on how to access that.
Yeah, we will send that out after the conference. But yes, just for this the earlier morning session and of course now, but yeah.
Yep, yep.
Awesome.
But while I was in undergrad, I did teach workshops. And so the whole point when it comes to embroidery and tatreez is the idea of continuing the lineage, of passing it down from one generation to the next, so that any effects that war or economical effects that could have had on those regions and the groups of people are kind of alleviated in a way. And it becomes, in a way, our duty to continue that. Part of continuing a tradition alive is teaching it to other people and having other people research it and practice it, and then having them talk to other people about it. That plays a big role in undoing all the effects that impacted a group of people in a region as well. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to host any workshops at any level. So just let me know.
That's awesome. I wish you had been here this fall because we had a whole 6-week project with a guest artist called the Mending Project. And
I
so,
saw that. I
yeah,
saw
so people were
that. Yeah.
making quilt squares and all that, and you could have kind of done some of your designs and all that. But anyway,
It
it's
was
all good.
beautiful. I did see that. It was really beautiful.
It was fun. But we're so happy to have you now. This has been great. And it's so nice
Yeah.
to have a follow-up. That was a new format, so that's very cool.
It
Gives me
made a
the
lot of
time.
sense with us, especially because it is a very like hands-on community based as well. So it
Yep.
made sense to come back and debrief a little. All
Yeah, exactly. Awesome.
right.
Any other questions, anyone?
And I will say that there is a lot more publications and a lot more books that are actually being put out about the different patterns. And so you can just look up, especially within the Palestinian region. So you can look up Palestinian tatreez, and a lot of it comes up, and you have all the different patterns. And a lot of books do a really good job at dividing it up into regions. So you can even like look through a book and see one specific bird or one specific plant that has been depicted differently across different cities and different regions of that same country.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, I
Thank you
appreciate
so much.
everyone for hopping on. Thank you so much. I hope
Yeah,
it's been informative and it's been helpful and something new that everyone got the opportunity to learn about.
that's right. That's right. Awesome. Thank you so much.